everyone. Welcome to the AOI streams, in-depth conversations with digital artists and experts to explore how blockchain technology is impacting the future of art. AOI, also known as Art on Internet, is the movement for emerging art and technology. I'm Federica, and today I'll be your host. In this episode, we invite generative artists Emily Xie, Hobbs and Casey Reas to walk us through the creative process behind their one-on-one artworks for the first In Our Code group exhibition. Also joining us today, Abigail Miller from the Gallery Unit London, partner and location of the exhibition.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Super excited today. This is our second episode of Masterclass Fridays. We're here today with some amazing artists from the In Our Code exhibition. We have Abigail from Unit London as well, and Letitia from the AOI team as well. Super excited. Hello, everyone. I wanted to remind everyone to please leave your questions in the chat in our channel so that we can read them through while we're talking and to the panel as well. I actually would like to start by talking a little bit about the In Our Code exhibition. We've got Abigail here. The exhibition just started a couple of days ago. Super excited. It's going to be on until 16th of October. And Abigail, how's it going so far?
It's been an incredible response. We just had our private view, which is kind of the public launch event. We had over 1,000 people come through in 3 hours, which is the biggest response we've ever had to a show. And so we had actually a line that was 2 blocks long to get into the show. And so we're quite excited, and it's very much an experience to go through the show rather than just artworks hung on white walls. And so it's quite great, and each artist chose an object to tell a story about their work. So it's been very great to work with everyone, and the response is wonderful. And we're getting ready for Frieze here in London as well, programming with the show to showcase it to an even broader audience. So we're excited.
That's awesome. And you also have your first podcast, Uni on Chain, featuring some of these amazing artists as well. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes. So we have a podcast. Our first episode was actually with AOI. And the point of this podcast is to dive deeper into various topics with artists. So I think Casey, alongside the academic Douglas Dodds, will be our next episode that's out. We have an episode directly with Tyler, and then Emily has an episode with the artist Iskra and William Upon. And each episode actually talks more about a different topic with generative art. Some are more about artistic practices, some are about the history of generative art, some are about how do we find the relationship between human and machine. So it's very different each episode, and we're trying to keep it interesting with those topics. So we're very, very proud of it. And the artists have been so amazing to work with and join us on creating this podcast, which is our first time ever doing it. So thank you all.
That's awesome. And Letitia, hello as well from the AOI team. How is it going in their Discord server?
It's great. We're nearing the 1,000 members without having done any kind of marketing. So that's kind of cool. In fact, we've been hiding the link. So it's exciting to see that people are super excited about what's going on. And I think that the IOC show in London and the work of the people in this room have contributed tremendously to the recognition and to the success of this community. So we've got an amazing community of a lot of artists, different styles, coming from all sorts of backgrounds. We got all day and night sort of activity going on, and beautiful intros. So if any of you are new in our Discord, you have got to check out the intros. They're absolutely amazing, of artists presenting themselves and talking a little bit about where they're from in terms of their art as well. So it's been an amazing journey. It's only been, I think, a week, Federica, something like that. It's very short. So we're very excited about where it's going. We're also obviously still working on the things that we're wanting to develop. So there's a lot of questions where we're still finding out the details. But in the meantime, we're building the relationship, and I think that's it's so fun. It's so fun to see everybody, and to actually having had some kind of interaction with everybody in the room, with everybody in the audience as well, is a luxury. I think I'm going to enjoy that while it lasts. So yeah, it's been just an amazing journey, and there's more to come. There's more things coming up. But I think with everything that you guys are already doing, Federica, and the artists coming here today, it's already incredibly generous and exciting. So I haven't had any complaints that there's not enough going on. That's for sure. So super exciting. And we're trying to also now start encouraging people to get maybe one or two friends that they think would be a great addition to this community. So rather than, running any kind of competitions to have you guys, invite gazillions of people in here, we want you to handpick them. We want you to think about who should be in here at a day like today with an event like this one, which is an absolute pleasure. It's an absolute gem. I mean, seriously, this is the best birthday present ever. So super excited to be here. And I'm super excited for everybody that's here and everybody that's going to watch this in the recorded version as well.
That's great. Thank you. And for those who are in this session right now, if you're fans and you're passionate about generative art, we also have our section of Inner Code. There's a generative lounge where you can talk about generative art, learn about the artists of the exhibition, and much more to come as well. So please make sure you're part of that as well. And I think I can now go to presenting the guest of today, this amazing artist. It's such an honor to have you all here today. Literally, we were talking about it in the team. We were just like, I can't believe this. We managed to have them with us today. It's such an honor to be able to talk to you. We've got Casey Reas. If I can give an introduction, he's considered one of the pioneers of generative art. He contributed to the creation of processing in 2001. So it's an open source programming language. We can talk about this a little bit in a second. We've got Tyler, is a visual artist from Texas. His artwork focuses, he says, on how modern computer hardware and software shapes aesthetics and how that all is connected to the natural world as well. And then we have Emily Xie. She's a generative artist living in New York City. And she works with algorithms, and she is inspired by her culture and femininity. So super excited to have you guys. How are you today?
Doing wonderful. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Hello.
Yeah, very good.
Welcome. Right. So I think I want you to kick off the conversation about generative art just by starting some sort of connection that I see just in your introductions. There's an element that I think that kind of combines all of your introduction, which is that you all have experience in other sorts of medias that you really like to use and experiment with. And so I wanted all of you talk to us a little bit about your artistic career in relation to other types of art, and how do you feel that generative art makes you express something that you can't do with other media? I think we can start maybe with Emily. Should we start with that?
Sure. So I've been doing art for most of my life in some capacity or another. As a kid, I played a lot with traditional media. I did a lot of charcoal. I did a lot of painting, oil pastel, pencil drawing. And then that sort of continued all the way through college for me. And then I turned to photography at some point because I enjoyed kind of how easily shareable it was. And so I think all of these kind of have impacted my current generative art practice, being able to sort of create things from scratch, but then also the sort of shareability of things. And also maybe there's this element of interactivity sometimes that can come with generative art. All of these elements kind of drew me to the field. And of course, I have a software engineering background as well. And so it just made sense. Generative art just made a lot of sense for me to explore. But I would say that my past art practice certainly informs maybe the subjects I'm drawn to. Maybe also a lot of people describe my generative art as highly material and textural. And I think that probably comes from this background. I also studied history of art and architecture as an undergrad. And so I think that sometimes that also informs my practice in the sense that I look backwards and think about art in the context of art history and kind of the art movements that have happened and take a lot of inspiration from past work and sort of link it back to generative art, which is, a medium very much of our current time.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. Tyler, do you want to go?
Sure, absolutely. Like Emily, I grew up drawing and painting. I was lucky to express a lot of interest in artwork when I was young, and so I was lucky that my parents got me like into some after school painting programs and some like private instruction in painting. So painting has been a big part of my life since I was young, and I've always really, really enjoyed it. Also spent a long time, studying kind of very traditional artwork, very traditional art through the lens of pencil drawing, particularly a lot of like figure drawing, and really, really enjoyed that as well. And honestly, the only reason that I kind of left that mode of art making was that I had studied computer science and, was working as a programmer, and I felt like programming was such a big, important part of my life, and it had really shaped how I viewed the world and evaluated the world, that I knew that it needed to be involved in my artwork in some way. Experimenting with that combination is what got me into generative art before I even knew the generative art was a thing. But immediately for me, like the results were so compelling and so interesting that didn't look back at doing painting and drawing for quite a long time. I just focused on generative art for several years. But I think there was this kind of residue, or this like, I think my aesthetics had been kind of like baked in to a certain extent at that point from all those experiences that I had had. And, a lot of digital art didn't necessarily resonate with me because I often found it kind of like too clean and too cold and too maybe perfect in some ways, in a way that like the analog media that I had worked with before was not. And so I think a lot of my style working with generative art is a product of being so deeply involved in those like physical media before. And, eventually after creating nothing but generative art for a few years, I started really experimenting with ways to mix the two as well. And I think there's something really special about kind of working across the spectrum, just because I think like our lives these days are kind of in both worlds, both the physical and the digital. And so I find art really interesting that shares some components of both. And so, I plan to continue mixing the two.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Tyler. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
I was stalling for you there, Casey, while I saw you were getting a material. So, yeah.
Thank you. No, I just realized I'm sitting in my studio with my flat file. We're talking about drawing. I'm going to go pull some drawings. So I think Emily and Tyler and I maybe have a similarity in that I think we just grew up drawing all the time. At least I grew up drawing all the time. Like that was who I was as a kid, my identity. With my, my age and where I was, it wasn't until halfway through college that I was able to move into the digital. So I spent my first 2 years of college drafting, painting, making everything with my hands. And that's actually my artifact in the exhibition is a set of antique drafting tools, largely as a reference to that. And then as soon as I could move to the digital, I went there, like fully embraced it. And for me, that's when things really clicked. Like that was like a moment of acceleration. And also I didn't learn to code really until I was about 28 years old. Like I was out of college, I was working in the world, and I started working in the web. And I just realized that there were things that I wanted to make that I wasn't able to make. And so, I started to learn to code. And for me, that's when things really happened. And so the very first things I made with code were drawing. And so like this is an example from the Tissue series from around 2001, from code that was written around 1999. And then this is from the microimage series that came after. And so what I really wanted to do was I wanted to draw with behaviors. I wanted to draw with 1,000 lines at one time. I wanted to do things with drawing that I wasn't able to do with my digits. And so that was really what launched everything forward.
That's incredible.
Were those pen on paper? Were those plotter drawings or?
That's before I knew plotter drawings existed, because the history was pretty obscured back then. So they're archival pigment prints.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I love them.
Thanks for asking.
That's awesome. Thank you all for these amazing introductions as well. I wanted to kind of discuss something that I want to know what you guys feel about this. I heard Casey saying code is a thought amplifier and code is a general way of thinking. Can you tell us a little bit more about this concept, this idea of using the machine as a sort of like an extension of your thoughts? And I also want to know what the other artists think about this.
I guess for me, we have physical tools that we use all the time to build and to make with. And for me, a computer and the software that runs on it is just a way of amplifying the mind more than the physical body. I believe that, I'm so constrained by how much I can hold in my head at one time, how much sort of information I can work with, what I can really imagine. And so I work with software as a way of getting outside of those constraints and outside of those boundaries. That's the fundamental piece of that for me. Just getting outside of my own limitations, my own mental barriers, and being able to extend and push further into doing things and seeing things and imagining things that without that process of working with code, I never would have been able to get to.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like that process it's almost like it's an extension, like a biological kind of extension in that sense. Could you say that in that sense? Like it does happen.
Yeah. I think coding is thinking. I think it's one of the most human things we can do completely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you get over a boundary where it's technical at first, it's challenging at first, but then becomes a fluid language that you can work with. And like Tyler's fluent in languages that I'm not fluent in. And I've always been curious about that. Like, what if I could think in the way that he thinks through the language he knows that I don't know? I think it's, the most human thing you can do to code.
Yeah, and I think that leads in like to something that I find really interesting, thinking about languages and how that sort of like shapes what you can do and what you can express. Computers have like a very opinionated language, right? Like at their core, everything boils down to like loops and arrays, like these very kind of strict constructs. And all of computer architecture, hardware and software is like really built around these mechanisms. And so the kinds of things that you can express naturally in a computer language are things that work with loops and things that work with, arrays. And so the computer very much like shapes the type of artwork that we're able to make. And that's where I think, as Casey's saying, it's like both an extension of your hand and your brain, but it's a very particular and limiting extension in some ways. It's both freeing and limiting, right? Like the pencil, every medium has this trade-off. The pencil is very freeing because you can just sharpen it, get right to work. You can draw any sort of line that you want to, and you can like shade things in, but you can't get color out of it. You can't work on something the size of a building. You can't, there's a limitation to the detail and the precision. And every medium enables certain types of expression and prevents certain types of expression. And so I'm really interested in like, what is it that the computers both enable and disable? That's part of what has fascinated me about this form of artwork and what I think makes it really new for us.
Emily, I see you nodding.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to thank Casey and Tyler for sharing those thoughts, because it was just very fascinating to kind of hear it put that way. Because I was going to say, for me, I tend to view maybe the code, the machine, I tend to view it as more of this like partner that I'm kind of working with. Like it's a back and forth interaction. It's kind of like a dance. And I think I kind of rely on the code, on the machine to inject this element of surprise in a way that like, I just love when sort of, the algorithm produces something and I just wouldn't have thought to create this sort of composition, or I was just surprised to see, these colors next to each other and the effect that has and on the resulting artwork. So it's very interesting because I feel like a lot of the times, maybe kind of back to what Tyler was saying about the constraints of the medium, code as a medium is inherently, it's like pretty geometric. It's pretty like rigid. It's like systematic. And I feel like a lot of the times I'm kind of fighting against that and just putting in extra work just to do things that seem more kind of handmade. And so I think like in a way, the machine is like a partner that I'm working with, like a kind of stubborn and difficult one, but still, I think that sort of interplay is very fun to explore. And yeah,
That's a great
two things.
description of it. Go for it, Casey.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. One thing to add, prior to coding, I was such a fuzzy thinker. Like I wasn't really able to sometimes like focus my thoughts, and the rigidity of coding actually forced me to have a clarity that was necessary for me. So that was like, it took years to sort of find that. And then the other thing that I'm really drawn to with software is that it's really a meta medium. Like we talked a little bit about exploring painting and drawing and photography, but with code, with software, I can work with video, I can work with photography, I can work with sound. And like over the years, I've created works that have integrated and sort of synthesized all those things together. I think right now, this sort of the state of so-called generative art on the blockchain is very optical, it's very visually focused, but there's so much more opportunity that we can explore as a community together.
Tyler, you wanted to add something on this?
I mean, Casey's 100% right.
Awesome.
Totally agree.
And talking about your experience as generative artist in the space, how has it changed over the years? How do you see, is there some difference between how generative artists are treated compared to other artists? How's your experience with that?
I mean, historically, generative art is kind of like the redheaded stepchild of the art world in a lot of ways. Like, I wasn't there, obviously, in the old days, but just like reading accounts of that, there's a book called When the Machine Made Art that kind of gives a bit of a chronology of like the critical reception of generative art early on. And let's just say didn't go very well for the artist or for the artwork at that time. I think, people feel so strongly and personally about artwork as like one of these it's like a core element of being human and human expression. And so I think people that care deeply about artwork kind of inherently care very deeply about what it means to be human. And I think once you start bringing a non-human element into artwork, people get really touchy and defensive about that. I mean, we've seen that with like AI artwork recently, right? But originally just the computer seemed like a threat, and it seemed like a step away from what it meant to be human. And so I think this is what really has like rattled people about artwork that's so computer focused for a long time. And so it makes sense to me that people have been kind of like really hesitant to embrace generative artwork. But I think what's maybe shifting in the broader sense is that I think everybody just realizes that our relationship with computers is just like on this kind of crash course where we're just kind of destined to be like married in a way. I mean, life has just gotten more entangled in computers every year. And so I think rather than kind of like fighting computers, I think we are better served by embracing them. And, instead of relegating computers to the realm of like, this is where you do business and this is how you make money, right? Like, I think like we should be absolutely using computers to make artwork, maybe even more important than making artwork with physical media for us in this time right now. And I think that, people in the broader society are maybe starting to feel that. Maybe they're not thinking about that so explicitly, but I think people are more open-minded about that marriage of the two. And honestly, like compared to AI artwork now, like just kind of the, let's say, old school method of generative art that the three of us practice is like, feels kind of safe and tame by comparison. Like it's much less threatening to what it means to be human, I think. So maybe it's like the friendlier alternative right now,
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think photography took like 60 years before it was considered an art and actually exposed. Mm-hmm. And I think color photography is like, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 years that it's being actually called or exposed in galleries. So yeah, it's not the first time that this has happened, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And we're coming up on like 60 years soon for generative art. Yeah, art with computers. So maybe it's time.
It's time, definitely.
And I was going to add like on the idea of how fast, you were saying, Tyler, how generative art is like the friendly one right now, like probably more supported than AI in this case. Do you think there's like some sort of connection with the fact that the NFT space is also going so fast? Is there some sort of relation to that, do you think?
Somebody else is welcome to answer, but the relationship between the NFT space and generative art is like a a really interesting one. I'm not sure that I'm even capable of like fully explaining that, that whole relationship. But I think the biggest difference or the big change is that NFTs have really made collecting digital art feel meaningful in a way that it just didn't before. And so I think this is the first time that kind of more broadly speaking, people have been interested in even the possibility of collecting digital art. And I think generative art sort of benefited from maybe being a couple of things. First of all, in some ways, it's like a very good marriage with blockchain technology. If you look at things like art blocks, it really supports like not an entirely new art form, but like a very new approach to making generative art. But it just couples really, really well. And so that's one benefit that generative art had. And I think the second is that maybe it was underexposed, right? It's been around for a long time. It's been around. Some people describe this as sort of like the third wave of generative art. We have the benefit of being able to look back at all these generative artists from the past and learn from what they've created. And so we're able to make, I think, better and more sophisticated artwork these days, largely also thanks to tools like processing that Casey and Ben put together. So the tooling and the community and the history have all come together to help us really make generative art on a new level. So I think a lot of people are first seeing generative art at a time when it's really improving substantially as an art form. And I think that ties in as well as to why generative art has seen such an explosion in popularity thanks to NFTs.
Yeah, I guess I would echo what Tyler was saying about how NFTs kind of have had an impact on generative art. I feel like, generative art, if you think about it, there was really no way to sort of own it, to like collect it, just because how do you do that for something that kind of like inherently exists as like pixels on a screen, right? Like something that's like infinitely reproducible. And I think some of the generative artists prior to this had managed to find ways to sort of sell their art. I know Tyler, when I first met him, he was selling his art as prints mostly. And I think that, with NFTs coming along, they definitely just made it really, as Tyler said, like meaningful to collect it, right? Like you finally can own something where it's natively, digital, where it natively exists on your computer. I definitely think that the ways this has changed the generative art scene as we know it, it's been huge. A lot of us generative artists were mostly hobbyists, to be honest, before the before NFTs came along. I certainly was. I just did it for fun. I did it because I loved it. And there was a community that kind of came around it where we were kind of like teaching each other things and learning from each other and just sort of making things just to put it out on the internet because it's fun. And now it's changed such that it feels like a, newly growing kind of, I think it's unfair to say it's like a newly growing art form, but like newly adopted, art form, newly sort of more appreciated by a wider audience. So yeah, like I think if NFTs had not come along, I'd be curious to know how would generative art have changed? Maybe it would have kind of stayed the same. Maybe it would have stayed kind of this like extremely niche sort of field that was primarily like a field of hobbyists and some lucky practitioners who were able to make a living off of it.
Yeah, I want to just say like how lucky those practitioners were. I'm going to guess that there was probably a 10-year stretch in the early 2000s where Casey was like literally the only generative artist able to support himself, and even that, like, I don't know too much, Casey, about your history, but I'm guessing that I know you're teaching, and so maybe even just selling the work itself was a difficult prospect, and was really hard to eke out an existence with generative art prior to NFT. So it's a really stark difference for us.
Yeah, generative art has always been made from like 8 p.m. until 3 a.m. in the morning. That's just how I think everybody was working, how it went. I think the really beautiful thing and precious thing about being, I'll just say, rejected from the larger art conversation is that we were able to form our own community that worked in a very different way. And the only people who really deeply cared about what we were doing were the people who were doing it. and we were able to share with each other. We were able to establish relationships that were based on mutual support, based on helping each other, which are wonderful things. And things have really changed a lot the last few years. I think that those roots are still there, but it's a different environment that we're working in right now. And the prior environment was really difficult and challenging for many reasons. The new environment is difficult and challenging for other reasons.
That's so interesting. Thank you all for sharing this. Letitia, I think there's a couple of questions from the Discord server, right?
Yes, thank you so much for giving them a look. So, well, we had the question, which you covered to some degree already in your previous answers, about the advantages of on-chain art, on-chain generative art versus off-chain. So you did cover a little bit about, the role of NFTs in getting out there, and also, I guess, the whole, buzz about NFTs in general probably has created a lot of talk around this. But is there any other aspects about how you produce your work or how you get it out there that has changed with it being on-chain?
For me, that's mostly distribution, which I think is essential to the work, because it's about the social component of it. Like, for example, before I would make one artwork that would have, an indeterminate number of permutations, and that would go to one collector. And then now I'll make a piece of software, and it will be sort of separated into 1,000 different iterations where each one is unique. Each one of it's like one of N. And instead of going to one collector, it'll go to 1,000 collectors, for example. And for me, that's really exciting. Like, lower the barrier to access to collect the work and to have more people engaged with it. It's been a really good shift for me. And I think for me, the constraints of on-chain generative art are really exciting. I mean, sometimes I want to work with, huge video files and process those and do a live performance. But then other times, sort of the constraint of needing to basically fit the code on chain, it really focuses on how each artist is unique from each other artist, because we're all working with a similar medium, but producing extremely different things.
Emily, did you want to, or Tyler as well, chip in on that?
First of all, everything Casey said, I 100% agree with. Yeah, I'd also say I think people know that I've kind of written about this long form generative art, where things like the art blocks model, for me, thinking about generating 1,000 pieces of artwork with one program, I just didn't think about it that way prior to this. I was thinking about, as Emily mentioned, I was selling prints before this. And so I was thinking about selling, 5, 10, 15 unique prints from one algorithm. And so the types of algorithms that I was designing were really targeting that, supporting that type of range. And so for me, it's been a huge shift to thinking about.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. There it goes. Yeah, I see it in the Discord now. So cool. So this is my piece for the In Our Code show, titled 1.1 Overflow. This work, for me, it's I think the thing that I'm most interested in about it, this ties into what, how this discussion opened, is that it does kind of sit in this sort of existence in between the analog and the digital. And in many ways, I kind of always find myself going back and forth between the two and wanting the best of both worlds. On the one hand, I love with analog work how it can just feel sort of spontaneous and chaotic and messy. And you get these unexpected features. And then something I love about, working with the computer is just that it's tireless and insanely precise, and it can do something a million times with no sweat, right? And so this work, what I love about it is that it kind of uses both of those elements, right? So I'll zoom way in here. You can see everything is built out of, repetition of hundreds or thousands of smaller elements here. It's sort of stacked up over 5 different layers. And so, the number of individual marks in this is probably in the millions. I haven't tried to count it, but something that puts it entirely outside the realm of what you could reasonably expect to do by hand. And yet, it's got this crazy repetition and sort of structure to it, but softened very much in a way, right? I'm always looking for ways to kind of loosen the grip of the computer, or ways to kind of coax it into doing something a little less expected or a little less perfect. And that shows up both in the details and in the broader composition here. This is just one particular output from this algorithm, a pretty substantial amount of variety in terms of what this algorithm puts out when you just sort of run it repeatedly on a loop. But this was the output that I found most special by far from the algorithm. It's just sort of one of those emergent outputs where everything lined up well on its own. As the generative artist, you're trying to set the stage for these kinds of things to happen well. And to a certain extent, you kind of just have to have faith that something like this will come out. And so, when I saw this particular output, it had a lot of the things that, if I were painting, the kinds of things that I would be thinking about in terms of rhythm, in terms of movement, in terms of like how the eye moves across the image, as you take it in terms of like echoes of different elements, in terms of like having some calm space and some dense space. These are all things that, like, if I was creating it by hand, I would maybe intentionally be thinking about how to achieve each of those. But one of the great things about this approach to generative art is that I can instead sort of allow the computer to do a lot of those things for me by chance, and I'm just there to observe it and appreciate it, and I guess to recognize it in like the curation phase of creating the work. And what's also great is that the computer will achieve those things in a way that I probably never would have been able to think of were I creating it by hand. That's the power of working with randomness as part of your process. And so that's one overflow. I have some of the pieces that are included in the show and that I've mentioned that were inspirations for this work. Yeah, let me share some of those. Let's see. Yeah, so some of the inspirations. This is and sort of interestingly, all of my inspiration pieces are painters. I mentioned I feel really attached to painting, and that's just the type of work that tends to inspire me most. So this is a painting by an artist named Alfredo Arreguin, originally from Mexico, but I think now lives in Seattle. And he just has these incredibly lush, dense paintings. Like, he just does maximalism like on a whole nother level. And, I'm often tempted by sort of the minimalist side of artwork as well. Like, probably my very favorite artist in the world is Agnes Martin, and she created incredibly structured and rigid and minimalist works. And so I find it unusual that like I both love Agnes Martin and love Alfredo Arreguin so much. But his work has helped me to embrace the kind of maximalist desires that I have, and his ability to work with such a complex color palette and like, let your eyes go a little fuzzy. The whole thing is just chaos, but there's so many interesting pockets in there. Some kind of similar stuff. This is a little older. This is Gustav Klimt, the painter who created The Kiss. This is his best known work, but he also, for fun, did landscapes on the side. And again, these are kind of just an example of like a much looser composition that's really verges on the abstract, and especially something that has kind of like this pointillist effect, but is kind of like grouped into these zones. This is kind of how I think about composition a lot with my works like 1-1 Overflow. Also, this is something that I haven't spent a lot of time looking at Gerhard Richter. This is Gerhard Richter painting. He made these large paintings using, put a lot of paint on the canvas and then use a squeegee to sort of like swipe the paint across the canvas. And, I think this was more of like an observed connection rather than an inspiration per se. This is something that's, as I'm working on creating these works, any generative work, I start just noticing the ways that it echoes paintings that I know and love. And this, while I was working on this, I definitely started thinking about Gerhard Richter's squeegee paintings and just that kind of like horizontal motion to them. This is
I was exactly going to ask you about this concept of observed connections rather than you say inspirations, and so it happens to you. Then you basically you start working on something, and then you start thinking of this inspiration. So like this connections that you could have had. Does it ever happen that you're creating something you don't really know what influenced it. And then you kind of like take a step back and like process the artwork once it's finished, and then kind of find these connections afterwards.
Definitely. Yeah. I would say it happens. Yeah. The relation to other artwork can happen before creation, during creation, or after creation. Sometimes I do see a work, maybe I do see a work like this and I'm like, wow, like I really want to try for something that's super dense and lush. And I'm not going to set out to like copy this work in any way, but maybe it sort of like gives me that push to attempt a type of work that I maybe haven't attempted before. And other times, maybe like this Richter piece, right, is while I'm working, I start to notice like, like this has some elements from that work. And like, it's just really interesting to think about, I'm questioning myself, like, am I seeking out some of these things because I've seen it in paintings before, or what's the connection there? It's not always clear as the artist what the connection is. And I think as an artist, you want to have like a rich set of works to sort of draw from, right? Like your visual vocabulary, but you also want to make sure that you do your own thing. And so you're not going to set out to like literally copy this Richter unless you're doing a study. So, and some things like, you don't really notice until the work is done. And you like, I love, these are Joan Mitchell paintings, and I love her paintings to death. She's just, what she was able to do is just otherworldly to me. And I like the colors that she takes on. These are really, really difficult palettes to make them work. And she just does it and makes it look effortless and like she just got in there and had fun painting. And that kind of like carefree spirit, I really love. And sometimes when I look at my work, like the 1-1 overflow piece, I notice parts of that I'm able to appreciate in the same way. And these works, when I look at them, they still feel like they're like 100 times better than anything that I could do. But I just hope to like, at least in some ways, be able to work on their level and for some components or facets of the work. And so I'm always looking at other art and thinking about the connections to my own work.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to pinpoint as well that one of your inspiration has got flowers as well. So I think it's really interesting to come back to the topic of flowers. So awesome.
I mean, flowers are like I've made my own work that has flowers in it multiple times. I think probably in generative work, probably 10 different works that have flowers. So they're just, like Emily said, it's interesting how much we connect to them as humans. I think it's sometimes easy to write it off as like flowers are beautiful. And like, if you want to make like beautiful artwork, like you just take this beautiful subject. And I think in contemporary art, they've maybe even been looked down upon some. And I don't think that that's fair. I think they're like one of the most incredible things from the entire world around us, and that we should be able to celebrate those. And I think, they're just, as Emily said perfectly, like they carry so much meaning for us. So I'm glad that we can take time as artists to appreciate things like flowers and how we relate to them.
Anyone from the speaking panel wants to ask a question or ask something on this? No, Casey. I saw Casey taking a book before. I was like, I wonder what was that about?
He's saving it, I think. So that's 1-1 overflow. I think you also asked, can I talk about anything that's coming up? And I can share, if it's okay, just briefly on that.
Please. Yes.
Sure. Okay. So if anybody's been watching my Twitter lately, I've been working on this project, QQL, which is set to launch on Monday, this upcoming Monday. And as I alluded to at the start, this is NFTs have opened up interactivity as part of the art form for me. And this is my first real take on interactive generative art. And it's a long form generative art algorithm that the viewer is able to explore with a set of controls that I've crafted, and is able to help curate, sort of what's viewed as the final set of work to come from this. There'll be 999 NFTs that are generated from this. And so I can just show a few pieces here. As you can tell, the motif is very much built around dots and circles and sort of ways of stringing them together and organizing them. And I think I've invested probably more time in this single work than I have in any other work in my life. So I'm pretty excited to get it out there. I'm getting to that point where I'm getting like nervous about it. I'm curious, like Casey, if you ever still get nervous about putting new work out there, but I start like getting the sweats and like I have to stop drinking coffee and stuff like that when it gets close to showtime, because it's just, you have such a personal connection to the artwork, and it feels like you're putting yourself out there, and how people react to that, whether you want to absorb that or not, like it's hard to avoid. So
100%. I mean, the process is thinking one moment, this is the best thing I've ever made. And then the next moment thinking, this is trash. It's garbage.
Yes.
I've never made anything so bad. And then you never know when you release it. And then like 10 years later, sometimes you're like, oh, that one wasn't so great. Or, oh, I'm feeling better about that now than I ever have.
Yeah. I'm so happy to hear you say that. Like, I go through exactly the same stuff every time. And yeah, you really do need like long distance to know kind of what holds up over time. Or for me, there's like works from years ago that I didn't appreciate at the time, and now I do, or vice versa. So yeah, it's an interesting relationship with new work as an artist. So anyway, this is QQL, and I hope y'all are able to play with the website on Monday. It'll be open for anybody to use, free of charge. So hopefully everybody gets to have some fun with it.
I'm going to go through a little bit the Discord chat just to see if we've missed something. I hope we haven't.
Well, there was a question about starting out and how do you start out in this field? So I thought we might pick up on that at some point.
I think it will be a good way to connect it to Casey's work. And Casey, if you could go through the process of your artwork for in our code, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the whole journey of that.
Sure. So not to directly answer or have an opinion about that question right now, but to get into this stuff. So this is the environment that I make everything in. It's the processing code editor and some processing code. So I prepared a few slides to sort of talk about the work in our code. And before diving in, this work is largely about sets of instructions and systems, and they're instructions that are abstractions of how things work in nature. So they're not really about making visually abstract work, but they're abstractions of how things operate, how systems interact with each other and engage with each other. And it's all based on a set of core behaviors and core geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and get it started. Oh, I want to run it full screen. So a lot of my work is ambiguous in its scale. Is it macroscopic, microscopic? There's oftentimes a sense of natural phenomena, but it's never a simulation of that. I think it's always maybe sometimes reminiscent of it, but not directly there or on point. And this work is largely categorized by trying to find that balance between the two. So the work in the process series, which the works in our code are 3 works from that series, they all begin with a simple piece of geometry. This is where the drafting equipment comes from again. So we start with a circle and then we add behaviors to it. So a circle that moves in a straight line that's constrained to the surface, which means it doesn't like expand beyond the boundaries. It changes its direction while it's touching another circle. And then it moves away from circles that are overlapping. So it kind of keeps its personal space. And so that's really it. That's the description for what I call element 1. And then it can be abbreviated to this for notation. So it's like a new kind of notation system about forms and behaviors. And then this is the diagram that's produced by basically running those rules and behaviors. And when you start to reveal the behaviors through additional notation, for example, here you can see that they move on a straight line, but then when they overlap another, that's when they begin to turn. Here you can actually see some notation that shows that they are indeed turning. And then now in the inside, where the center of the circles are, you can see the forces of them moving away from the others that they're touching. And so when you have a set of rules and behaviors like this, and you move it from these instructions into code, there's a lot of interpretation that needs to happen. So for example, this is another way of interpreting this element 1, different speed, different scale. And this is yet another way of interpreting that. So when you go from the instruction set into a piece of software, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made and a lot of interpretation that needs to be made. I think of that like a score for a piece of music versus a performance of the music, where that score needs to be interpreted. So this is the full element 1. And then to look at another one, this is element 3. So element 3 starts with a line rather than a circle. It moves in a straight line. It changes direction also when touching other lines. And then these can actually like move around the surface. When they exit from the right, they appear on the left. So this is an example of element 3. This is a diagram for element 3. And where all the work in our code started is through these kinds of diagrams and understanding how these systems behave. This is another interpretation of that diagram. And this is yet another. So all the work that I do really starts with time. It starts with motion. When I work with visual form, it's always grown over time. You can always sort of see it build from nothing into the form drawing itself. So this is another one, element 5. We'll look at how this one works. These ones over time, they take some of their angle from the others and they begin to group together. It's a really minimal version of a well-known algorithm called like flocking by Craig Reynolds, but it's done in a different way. So over time, things start with like maximum entropy. Things are spread around, and then over time, order begins to form. So let's skip this one. I think we need to skip some stuff for time. But this is element 1, the circle with those 3 behaviors. But this is what I call the surface view rather than the diagram view. So instead of redrawing everything at a given moment, everything like renders into the same buffer over time. And then there's a few different rules about the gray value of the lines, depending on their length. So if they're the longest line it can be within the system, they move towards white, and there's a gradient to black for the shortest line in the system. So this is how all the work is grown over time. And then for the work in our code, it's basically paused at a certain moment, or I pause it at a lot of moments and then sort of pick one. In the end, kind of how Tyler was describing the work that he has. And so this is what's called the process, which is built around the element. So a rectangular surface filled with varying sizes of element 1, draw a line from the center of the elements that are touching, set the value of the shortest line to black and the longest to white with varying grays representing the values between. And so this is, for me, this is the work. And then I write code that is on top of this, and that code then produces images. But my primary focus is really on this specific piece of text representation. And like Tyler could take this and could write his own program that would be a version of Process 4. Emily could take this and write her own version of Process 4. And that would be an equally valid and wonderful sort of version of Process 4 on the same order of the ones that I create with it are. That's kind of the intent of the work. All right. I think I just need to kind of blow through some things for time. So I'm going to do that.
It's okay.
Let's look at
if you need some extra time, there's no problem for us.
Okay. Let's look at this one for a minute. This one is process 18. This is basically the final one. When I was doing the core of this work, it started with process 4 and went to 18. And this is the one where the lines aggregate together over time and they begin to sort of form these groups that flow through the space. And so equally to drawing, I think my work has also been highly influenced by painting. I've spent countless hours in museums everywhere that I can get to in the world, looking at paintings, thinking about them, drawing them, writing about them. And I think that is really a large part of where my work comes from. It comes from that lifetime of looking and thinking about pictures. So this is the instructions for process 18. So here we have lines. When the lines are overlapping, you can imagine 2 lines overlapping. We basically connect those points into these quads. And then the longer the lines are touching, the more the opacity of that shape grows. And so it creates that field of image that we were looking at before over a long period of time. Another thing that's really essential for me about this work is there's no end to it. So it has a beginning state. It has sort of like the Big Bang. It has the origin. But then the work just keeps going. It keeps changing. It keeps writing itself and erasing itself. And there's really no end to it. And so the idea really is that you live with the work. You maybe spend a little bit of time with it. Maybe a few days later, you spend more time with it. And you begin to understand like the subtleties of how it changes over time. All right, so this is the full series. We'll just go through them one by one. And these are the representative of the images in our code exhibition. So we're going backwards. This is one representative image of, an undeterminate number from process 18. This one's from process 17, process 16. And so all of these come from the same set of forms and behaviors, this really minimal subset. And a lot of this work for me was sort of finding a set of behaviors that are very straightforward, that are very understandable, that produce an unexpectedly, I would say, like diverse set of images. This is process 15, 14, 13. So this one works with element 1, which is the very first one that we looked at in a little bit more time. 12, 11, 10. This is 8. This is 7. This is one of the ones in the exhibition. This is 6. It's not in the exhibition. This is 5. This is actually, well, I don't know. I shouldn't say this. 5 is my favorite. But this is 5. And this is 4. Okay. So that's like an overview of the.
You have the same feeling that you shouldn't have favorites as if they were your kids? Is that the emotional reaction that you're having?
Yeah, maybe something else.
Okay. I love it.
I feel like I can have favorites. I feel like I shouldn't disclose them publicly.
Okay.
But sometimes I lose control, and there's something about process 5 has been like, I don't know. There we have it.
I almost feel, I don't know, Federica, what you think about it, but I almost feel we should have Casey write a process and then the community react to it and see what they come up with. Actually, we should have all of you write a process and see what the community comes up with. This is fascinating. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's incredible. I would love to know what the artists in the speaker panel think about this. Because I saw everyone's reaction. We were like so invested in this.
I think there's something about discovering your process as someone who's not necessarily in it, or maybe even from peer to peer, that's incredibly enthralling. So I remember I had the same reaction when I saw Tyler Hobbs take over the IOC account. That was like getting that glimpse inside. And with you, Emily, it was hearing you speak about it, and the words that you choose. And I think that's absolutely enthralling, just to get that little bit behind the scenes to understand what moves you guys and also what the technical aspect is. And I think, yeah, Casey, you express a lot of what moves you by showing us what you choose to make these, lines do. So it's really, I think really having you guys do this in this format is so much different than just, reading about it or looking at the work and trying to make sense of it. I think it adds a depth to it that on behalf of the community, I want to thank you all three for. This is just amazing. But no, I'll shut up and let you go on.
I think it also gives this feeling of you creating your own world by giving, all these behaviors. It really gives me the idea that this is like a planet that you're making, and then you're choosing how everything needs to move and where it needs to go. And it's such a mind-blowing idea to think that you can create something and give it a behavior and give it like a reaction to use. So it's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing this. Yeah, please.
I want to say one thing about that. It's just, I always love to draw references back to art history, but a big influence of that is actually on Marcel Duchamp. He made his own measuring instruments, by dropping string from 1 meter, and sort of that became his own unit of measurement that he used to create many of his most remarkable works. And so that was like a seed that I took a long time ago and sort of merged into my work about this idea of inventing your own physics, your own universe that you can build and create and construct as an artist.
Yeah, I was going to say that's something that's like very distinct, I think, about Casey's work, even within the field of generative art, is like how he tends to, from my perspective, kind of deal with things as if they're organisms that have their own set of behaviors, and that the artwork is something that evolves out of these like smaller components interacting and building, and the process like evolving. Yeah, Casey's work, I love that like everything you showed there was a video. I think even a lot of your work that we see as stills are really just stills from like a video evolution, right? So I think
it was actually running as live code.
As
which
live code,
is like a really important distinction from video. Like video is like a dead corpse, but live code is sort of electric and now and performative.
Yeah. When I say video, I mean live code. I don't even think about making videos. I think about live code. So yeah, my bad. But yeah, even something like, you did like that printed mural at UT, which was one of the first times I got to see your work in person. And I think even that one was like kind of similar, came out of like, a snapshot of something like that. At least that's my guess, right? So to me, it's like really fascinating how all three of us are essentially using the same tools. Like we're all working in like with a processing based environment. And I think all three of us have just like very different mental models about how we're approaching the work and putting it together.
Yeah.
Casey, there's a question from the audience directly to you. How long does it take? First of all, there was a appreciation, incredible, and you're a true master of your craft, says the person. How long does it take for you to develop the code? And do you repurpose or iterate on code for future works or start afresh?
I do all those things. I mean, I reuse code that I wrote 20 years ago relatively frequently, and I adapt it and I adjust it and I change it. And some days I could reuse code, but I choose not to. I just start fresh and I write the same algorithm again in a way that I can at the moment. I kind of work with code in a way where I kind of binge code, like I'll code really intensely for a few days. And then I will oftentimes spend months or sometimes years making small adjustments. And I really call it tuning. It's sort of like I get the majority of it down. And then I sort of learn through a really long process that if I change this number by 100, then all of a sudden it transforms the work in a way that's really significant for me. And so that's largely the process that I have, like getting the ideas out. For me, maybe the most important thing to express is this idea of sketching with code. Like I start sketching in a sketchbook. I'm still kind of old fashioned like that. Here's some sketches I was working on a few weeks ago, very, very preliminary, but I write a lot of like small, short, half-hour sketches, half-hour, 12-minute, 1-hour sketches, and then I go back and I look at those. And so the process is really important to me. And I oftentimes only discover the work through that process of sketching. I could talk for an hour about that, but I definitely will stop right there.
Casey's like inspiring me here. Hang on, let me see. I'm gonna say like I do the same thing like oftentimes. So just like I will do, just like sketches in the sketchbook to try to like just start getting a fresh idea on paper. Sometimes it's easier for me to get to like a fresh place when I'm working on paper rather than working with code. And so I'll do something like those drawings. There were kind of 4 that were like in a similar vein. And then I might look at them and try to think about them more systematically. Like what can I take elements of this and capture it with code and start to build the whole system out a little more rigorously, or just in my, I guess what's more of my standard materials of working with code. But yeah, Casey's showing his sketchbook. Maybe we want to like have to show something there too.
I'm so happy to see your sketches, Tyler, always. Yeah.
Emily, do you care to share your sketchbook?
I was looking for it as Casey and Tyler shared theirs out. I think it's in a different room is the problem. But I tend to sketch a lot towards the beginning where I'm trying to like ideate, like what am I in the mood to make? What is it that I want to create right now? And sometimes the like subconscious act of like drawing shapes like on a piece of paper and like sort of drawing things kind of reveals to myself like what it is that I want to make next. But otherwise, like my sketchbooks, it makes me, I'm pretty sure if you were to look at my sketchbook, you would think I'm just absolutely crazy because there's just like random like bits of code, like pseudocode all over the place. And then like frustrated like etchings as I'm like trying to work through a problem. There's like, and interspersed amongst that is like maybe like what I'm trying to make with the code. And then maybe like, okay, I couldn't quite make that, but here's what I am going to make. Maybe I can make some adjustments. So yeah, it's, I think like somehow connecting like a paper to a pencil and sort of getting things out with your hands, like that's important to me. Like it's hard for me to think without doing that sometimes. And I kind of wonder whether like maybe all of us have this habit given like our backgrounds, like with us growing up, drawing all the time, growing up doodling. So
completely. Thanks for expressing that.
Yeah. And I wouldn't think you were crazy from your sketchbook because what you described sounds very much like I showed a couple carefully selected pages there. The rest of it looks just like you're talking about. So yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm a little embarrassed to like share with people my sketchbook because it's just like
I don't share it. Yeah, I don't share it. I don't even my fiance, I don't give open access to my sketchbooks because for me it's like it's an important like safe space, like I have to feel like there's zero risk of like failure or rejection in the sketchbook. And if I know that people are going to be looking at it, that creates like an opportunity for that in some way. And so, yeah, I might choose to share a couple pages here and there, like I just did, but for the most part, they're just for me. So until I die, at least.
I guess it's the most intimate part of the creation, or at least the first part. So it's almost like, well, it almost makes me think like when you then create the final piece, do you create it thinking that, you know, people will judge it, like compared to what you have in your sketchbook, right? It's almost like, as you said, it's a safe space, because your sketchbook can have anything that you will know that it's not going to be an imposter syndrome on your sketchbook, right? But the final piece will be seen, and thus will be also judged, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the starting point for a work is like the most vulnerable point for that work. And so that's where it kind of needs the protection of something like a sketchbook, I think.
There is a question to all three of you about the collectors, which I think is an interesting piece. In your opinion, are the generative art collectors maybe crypto enthusiasts, or have you seen the traditional art world wake up to your art now?
I think the traditional art world is starting to become interested. I think that they are relating to generative art, but not necessarily to the NFT part of it quite yet. So one anecdote would be, I recently exhibited a series of 6 items at the Armory Show, which is very much a traditional art venue. And it, I displayed my art through prints, right? And there was an NFT attached to it. And we had traditional collectors come in and buy. And one traditional collector was just totally apparent, like this is just me hearing from the gallery, but they were totally disinterested in the NFT part of it. They just wanted just the print. And I think, of course, the gallery kind of worked with the collector and sort of got them around to the idea of the NFT, but it seems like to them, it's like super secondary. It's like the print, that visual thing that they could hang in their house that mattered. And so I think that, like the traditional art world is slowly starting to wake up to it. And I think that right now, maybe there's not that immediate connection for them. Like, I think what's going to happen is that, like right now, okay, a lot of generative art is displayed as prints. That still kind of detaches like the whole NFT versus like print sort of, that sort of detaches it in some ways. But I think what's going to happen is like once like really beautiful digital screens kind of come along, so that like digital art, generative art can be displayed in the way that, in their very native way, I think that's going to drive a lot more adoption, because I think that will make a lot of sense to people. But I think for the most part right now, a lot of generative art collectors are kind of crypto native. Yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
I just want to pop in here from the traditional, being in both sides. All three of you do have traditional collectors. And I just want to talk about Casey's career. You've done so many shows and you're actually widely collected in the traditional realm. Like you're in the MoMA, the Centre du Pompidou. So there is that very much connection to the traditional art world. And I think with the NFTs, it's the traditional art world just doesn't understand the mechanisms behind it. And so that's kind of right now almost like a jargon word here. However, but the response in the show is people come in and they're just like blown away of like, oh, like this visual output's created fully by code. And so I think the traditional art world has always had digital art being part of its conversation. It's now just the conversation of NFTs and how that's being incorporated. And so people who have maybe gotten their start on their market on NFT, like art blocks and long form, they're now getting also into like the traditional art world. And there's different mechanisms, but there's also a lot of traditional collectors that I know that both have Emily and Tyler in their collections. They're just not very vocal because they're not on Twitter. So it's the thing is everyone's there. It's just people don't know about it because people might not be tweeting about it. But I know all three of these artists are in very good collections. And as well as we are hoping your guys' collection, these works in this show, will be going to really good homes as well.
We had a great question, which is, what are the 3 must-reads from all of you about generative art? Is there anything you want to share about? That was going to be my shopping list coming up.
This is a tough question because generative art is not well captured in books right now.
Any medium, maybe it's a film. I know there's one about you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, sorry. The question specifically asked about generative art, and I'll just say like most of the best information is like in the form of videos, web pages, and things like that about generative art. There are some books, but I mentioned When the Machine Made Code, which kind of gives you a chronology of the intro, but if I can be quite frank, it's a bit of a dry read. Even for me, it was hard to get through. And it's very focused on like the critical reception rather than like the artist's thought process. And that's the side that's more interesting to me. Yeah, that book exactly, by Grant D. Taylor. But like I said, it's very focused on like how the art critics sort of reacted to the work, which is maybe not my most favorite part to think about or read about. So it is good for history, but a little dry. There's educational books, which I'm sure like Casey could point out quite a few of those. But just thinking about the art form, I think that's just kind of right now, it's just kind of scattered around the internet. There's a bunch of gems here and there. It's hard to point to like one specific, book or collection.
Anyone else?
Like the brass tacks of learning how to code. I think Daniel Schiffman does a wonderful job on the Coding Train, which is a YouTube channel. Yeah, and I won't suggest books that I've written about it, but I pulled a couple of books really quickly. This one is a classic by Herbert Franke. He just passed away a few months ago. He was a pioneer in the field. This is a book from the late 1960s, translated into English from German in 1971. It's just an extraordinary collection, snapshot of that moment. In London, where you all are, there's always the Cybernetic Serendipity Catalog. That was an extraordinary show at the ICA in London. What I love about that show is that it covers electronics and poetry and choreography and music and what we think of as generative art, plotter drawings, and that kind of thing. So I guess I picked a collection kind of from the origins of things. And then the last one is like this Saul LeWitt wall drawings book, where here you can see, for example, the instructions, and you can see the drawings side by side. So I always want to open up the conversation around generative art. Like, it's not only about computers, it's not only about code. A lot of artists have been working in this way for generations. And I always want that to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, if you look up the words serial art as well as cybernetics, you'll get like a whole field of academics opened up to you, because I think right now in art history, generative art's being much more revisited. And so a lot of things are going to be coming in the next coming years, even from revisiting the 1960s and what does generative art with a capital G mean today. But if you want to look, Casey's right, Saul LeWitt, serial art, minimalism, and cybernetics all encompass a lot of what we talked about today.
Sorry, I just jumped into professor mode for a minute. I apologize.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. There's a couple more questions, but I think that some of them we actually went over them during the discussion. Is there anything that we missed from before, Letitia? Any other question that we had before?
I don't think so, but I can run through.
I think we pretty much went through the questions while we were chatting. Right. And I think, we're also going to the 2-hour session now. So I think we can actually close the session. I guess any other questions you guys have from the chat, please reach out to the artist. You can also, drop them to us. We can also share them through our Inner Code account and kind of like create some discussions over there as well. And yeah, I want to thank so much you guys for being here today. It's been incredible. Such an honor to get to know you more and your work. These sessions, every week we have the sessions. I'm more and more mind blown, to be honest. So thank you so much for being here. Abigail, do you want to remind a little bit of information about the exhibition before we close the session?
Yeah, it's live now at Unit London here in Mayfair, London, and it'll be running to October 16th. So anyone who's in London, please stop by, as well as we're always available for tours. Just let us know ahead of time and we'll be able to greet anyone. And we're very excited to have the show.
But yeah, we have 2 more events. On the 29th, we'll have a panel here at Unit London. And then October 15th, we'll be having a Freeze Week opening, or more like closing during Freeze Week, to celebrate the artists here during like the mega events of London. But yeah, and we're just very thankful for all these 11 artists. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Abigail. Thank you for being here. And for those who maybe joined a little bit later, we're recording the session, so you will be able to find it in a couple of weeks. And so if you missed something, you will be able to get back to it as well. And yeah, thank you so much, Casey, Emily, Tyler, for being here. And yeah, have a lovely day or evening.
Thank you.
It was great to spend time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
it's been wonderful. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the AOI streams. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and subscribe to listen to more stories from the pioneers of the ecosystem.